Hey, today's sermon title gets right to the point today. Right to the point. It asks this question. It says, what is the purpose of religion anyway? What is the purpose of it? I mean, why are we here right now? I mean, there's lots of places we could be right now, but we're here. So what is the purpose of this religion thing, of this Christianity thing, of this church thing? What is the purpose of it anyhow? If you walked out of here today and someone were to ask you, hey, you were in church this morning, what's the purpose? What's the purpose of this religion thing? How would you answer that question for them? Is the purpose of religion to give praise and thanks to God? Is the purpose of religion to make sure that we are passing the traditions from one generation to the next? Is the purpose of religion to ensure that proper doctrine and polity are in place? Is the purpose of religion in order to influence and change governmental policies? I mean, or is it just a social thing? I mean, it's good to have a place to go and some people to hang out with. I mean, if someone were to ask you that today on the way home, what would you say? What is the purpose of religion? That's why that story that was just read for us, that Carrie just read for us, is such an important one because it gets to the crux of that question. You see, we have Jesus today, and where do we find Jesus? We find Jesus showing up at church. Jesus is in the synagogue. He's in the most visible religious institution of his community. But here's the deal. If you pay attention to Scripture, every time Jesus shows up at church, things get interesting. Right? You think by inviting Jesus to church, things are going to be calm and peaceful. But every time Jesus shows up at church, things get interesting. Be careful when you invite Jesus to church, because things are going to be interesting. I mean, look what happened in today's scripture. Jesus is doing what religious leaders are supposed to do. He's preaching. He's teaching. He's proclaiming God's word. And right there in the middle of the sermon, he stops. And everybody's out there going, this isn't in the order of worship. Jesus stops because he sees a woman sitting over on this side, and she's bent completely over. She can't stand up straight. And the word is that she's been like that for 18 years, almost 2 decades. And Jesus stops right in the middle of the worship service, and he sees her, and he calls her forward, and he puts hands on her, and he proclaims her whole. And in the middle of that proclaiming of her whole, a miracle happens right there in the middle of the church. It says for the first time in nearly 2 decades, she can stand up straight. For the first time in nearly 20 years, she can hold her head high. For the first time in as long as she can remember, she can be looked at in the eye, and others can see her. And it happened right there in the middle of worship. Imagine coming to a worship service where somebody was different when they left. Can you imagine coming to a church service where somebody was different when they left but when they came in? I mean, I hope you can. You're all like, I don't know, can we? I mean, right? I mean, think about that. Isn't that why we're here, with the hopes that someone, maybe even this someone, might be just a little different than when I walked in the door today, that I might be able to stand up just a little taller than when I walked in, that the burden that I carried might just be a little lighter, that I'd be a little less bent over, that I'd be able to be seen? Is that what we hope would happen? And my goodness, if it happens in the middle of church, wouldn't we expect everyone to be like, yay, Jesus, do that again? And that's why we're so surprised at the story Carrie reads. Because at this moment of healing and transformation, right there in the middle of worship, one of the religious leaders stands up and says, "Whoa, Jesus, that's not our tradition. That's not what we do here. Not right now. There's a proper way to do that, and this isn't it. There's a proper time to do that, Jesus, and this isn't it. So, Jesus, we would just assume that you don't do that ever again." Strange. And it gets us right back to the crux of that question today. So what is the purpose of all this anyway? What is the purpose of religion? Well, in this instance, the story that Carrie read for us couldn't make it more clear. If the choice is between keeping a tradition or loving the person, love the person. If it's a choice between being proper or being compassionate, be compassionate. Jesus warns the religious folks of his day and of ours that we should not confuse adherence to the letter of the law with following the spirit of the law. It asks the question, what keeps the Sabbath day holy? What makes this gathering holy? And if it's a choice between keeping the rules or offering the healing, in today's story, Jesus offers the healing. Now, let's not get too hard on that guy who stood up and said, "Jesus, stop all that." Let's not be too hard on him. Because truth of the matter is, at one point or another in our life, we might have been them. We might have been the one who said, "Whoa, that's not what we do here. That's not how we do it here." I mean, he's technically right, you know. The Sabbath laws are pretty clear. There's a certain way and a certain time to do things. And Jesus wasn't doing them in the certain or proper way. And let's just be honest, sometimes our religious upbringing has taught us to exactly be that guy. I know mine sure did. I mean, I was taught for most of my religious upbringing that if the choice was between being good or doing good, choose being good every time. I mean, and even make that harder. I mean, I'm a firstborn. Are there any other firstborn children here? Man, you are all in trouble. We firstborns have a hard time following Jesus. Because we firstborns have been taught to be responsible, to follow the rules. I mean, who's the youngest ones here? See, you don't care. Like, you guys are the one. I know Jim clearly is the youngest one, right? He's like, rules schmools, man, right? You know, we just get by, right? I mean, I'm sure that leader of the synagogue was a firstborn. Because he's responsible. And we've been taught, I can hear my mother in the back of my head, "Jeff, be a good boy. Follow the rules, Jeff. Respect authority. And don't ever embarrass us." Right? My mother would be really upset right now. Terribly upset right now. I'm sorry, right? Don't embarrass us, especially in church. I mean, we firstborns, you know, you bring your firstborn to church and you're all like, shh, shh, be quiet. By the time you younger ones come along, we've lost the battle, right? But we want to keep order and keep rules. This week caused me to ask myself some tough questions. Why is it that sometimes I want to hold so tightly to tradition, even when I realize that holding on to it actually keeps Jesus from being Jesus? Keeps others from experiencing the healing that Jesus wants to give them. And sometimes when it's a choice between the healing and the tradition, I still hold on to that tradition. You know, I'm a rule follower by heart. Been taught to trust that rules will keep us safe, and rules will keep us protected, and rules will give us some sense of order. And so I have a hard time giving up on an old habit or an old tradition, even when I know it no longer serves the purpose it once did. Because when I give it up, I feel like I've lost something. I've lost control, or some sense of chaos, and somewhere along the line I was taught that to get God's blessing I had to be good instead of having to do good. And so we come to church. People come here hoping this will be the one place that provides some sense of stability in their lives. And along comes Jesus, and he starts messing everything up. I got to be honest with you, it's only been stories like today's where I've had to prayerfully wrestle with Jesus, who consistently sets aside the religious standard of his day in order to help people know and experience the transforming presence of God. It's only by wrestling with a Jesus who's willing to set aside the religious tradition of his day in order to make sure that somebody new can experience God's love and healing. Let this sink in for a minute. Jesus is willing to extend the boundaries. Jesus is willing to bend the rules. Jesus is willing to let go of tradition. Jesus is willing to receive misunderstanding and ridicule. Jesus is even willing to risk his own life in order to make sure that you get the healing you need. Think about that. Jesus is willing to extend the boundaries for you. He's willing to bend the rules for you. He's willing to set aside tradition for you. He will be ridiculed and misunderstood. He will even risk his own life so that you don't remain bent over, so that you can stand tall, so you can hold your head high, so that you can be seen. Jesus is willing to do that for us. So we have to ask ourselves today, are we willing to let Jesus free us so that we can bring that healing to others? But more importantly, I got to ask you, are we willing to free the church so that it too can be a place of healing and transformation? A couple of words about this woman in our story today. Did you notice she's never once called by her name? We don't know her first name. All we know about her is that she was the woman who was bent over for 18 years. All we know about her is her suffering and her shame. It is really easy to make people nameless when all we see in them is the condition of their suffering and shame. Oh, here's that poor thing. Bent over for 20 years. I heard it was demons. Oh, here she comes. Third divorce. Oh, that poor thing. Oh, here's him. He fell off the wagon again. Oh, there's that poor family. They got that special needs kid. He's always acting up during worship. Geez, I don't know how they do it. Or him, I heard he spent some time in prison. I heard that she might have had an abortion. Him, I think he used to be a she, didn't he? Him, I heard his father is mentally ill, and I heard it might run in the family. Our whispering about people's condition renders them nameless. And the more that people are only known by their suffering and their shame, the more bent over and weighed down they can become. And that's where everything in today's story changed. Notice where it changes in the story. Jesus says, isn't it necessary for this woman, this daughter of Abraham? Listen to that. He says, isn't it necessary for this woman, this daughter of Abraham? Bam! He gives her a name. He doesn't say this is the woman bent over. He says, no, this daughter of Abraham. He calls her child of God. He sees through all of that suffering and all of that shame and sees her as a person worthy of the promise. My goodness, isn't that all it takes sometimes? It's just one person who can see us to get you to straighten up just a little bit, to get you to stand taller, to open your eyes and let people see you and be seen, to be known as a child of God. I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of that kind of people. I want to be a part of that kind of place. A place that's willing to just see people, as sons and daughters of Abraham, as children of the promise. We did this experiment at the beginning of the summer. If you were here, you might remember it. It was kind of weird. In the middle of church, we asked 30 people to come forward, and we didn't tell them what they were getting into. And when we walked up here, we gave them each $50. That's right. We gave out more money than we took in that Sunday. Don't tell the finance chair, right? And we gave 30 people $50 in 50 days. And said, do something with that to make God's love known in the world. And as soon as some people realized what they'd gotten into, they bent right over. Oh no, I'm not worthy enough. I'm not religious enough. I'm not smart enough. This is too big a burden for me to carry. And we went to each person who suddenly felt weighted down by all that guilt and that shame about what they were not, and we looked them in the eye and said, you can do this. Straighten up. You're a daughter or son of God. God can use you to make a difference in this world. And amazing things happened this summer as these 30 missionaries left this place walking a little taller, standing a little straighter, their head held a little higher, their eyes open to what God might put in front of them. These are just some of the stories of what happens when a church remembers why it's here.
At Easter Seals doing mental health therapy. So I was actually just really frustrated one morning. I was driving to work and I was like, you know what, God, I don't know. I don't know what you want me to do. And pulled into Target and I said, you know what, they're doing the toiletry drive. Let me get some toiletries. So I spent $50 getting just all sorts of toiletries, and I made a little store in my office. So I set it up on my windowsill and I put a little paper in the box, and when the kids started coming in at the end of every session, we would take some time and I explained to them, you know, this is what these toiletries are for, these are the people they go to, and then I also have a candy bucket that usually I let them pick from. While I would give them fake money, I printed fake money. This is your choice. I said, here's my store, you have candy, you have these products, they're gonna go to people who really need them. And the beautiful thing about it, and it's hard for me, I start to get choked up when I think about it, but every single child, except for maybe two, chose to get the toiletries. And so then we would kind of talk about how it felt to give, what it was like, how the person who was receiving it might feel, and the fact that they would never know who it went to, but that person would know that they were cared and they were loved about.
I stopped by the florist shop. I picked up $50 worth of flowers, and I went down to the Whiskey and Pig Festival in Ferndale on the hottest day of the summer and passed out flowers. And we started by coming through the neighborhood, gave a couple of the postal worker ladies who were a little shocked. I even got a couple of God bless yous from them. But then when we hit the actual festival, most people just were not excited to receive a flower. One gentleman who was working actually asked what they were for, and I told him to make you feel good, and he says, oh. And I said, do you know anybody that needs to feel good? And he goes, sure. So I handed him a couple for him to pass out. But other than that, no, we just worked our way through the festival and handed out flowers to people who were unbearably hot at 10 o'clock in the morning already. And they had a whole day ahead of them, so. And that's about it. It felt good to do. made me feel good.
Came across this organization called the Magic Yarn Project. And they make these princess and superhero wigs for children that have cancer. They're soft yarn and they feel empowered. What my goal is to have a workshop so we can have many people in the church make maybe 20 wigs for children with cancer. In fall, look, I'm hoping to have a workshop. So I prayed, what else could I do with this money? And it's amazing how prayers work. The next day, I got this email from a fellow I met on an airplane a year ago. He is a youth minister in the Philippines. And he asked if I'd like to contribute money to a project where they help get school supplies for children in need in the Philippines. And I thought this was perfect. So I split my money, $25, plus I got another $25, so we spent $50 to this project in the Philippines. Lighthouse Community is their name. And then I will reserve $25 to set up a workshop in the
$50 is being part of the food services program and the Do Good dinners that we're already doing, and we were inspired to do something for the holiday season.
Correct. So basically the plan is to get people to donate money towards a Christmas dinner for people in need. And the money would be then thank you cards and to go back to them to formally thank them for their donations.
65 people.
65 people.
In the dining room at Pronto, and it'll be Christmas, Santa Claus is coming, we'll have gifts for everybody. Big buffet, turkey carving, ham carving, all the fixings, and try to make a really amazing experience for people in need.
Amazing things can start to happen when a church tells people to stand tall, to hold your head high, that you are a son or daughter of the promise and God can use you to do amazing things in the church. And amazing things will happen when a church starts to set aside its traditions in order to let other people and new people feel empowered to live into God's new world. Read your bulletin today. See all of those stories of transformation. 17 different organizations got blessed. 200 individuals were touched. $27,000 were raised. Think of all the things that happened this summer. Miracles all over the place. People touched the lives of prisoners with music, and women in Haiti and Ghana as entrepreneurs. The gift of camp was given to kids. Blessings and backpacks were given to families in need of food. There's women who decided it was time to start helping some women. There were care for lost dogs and stray cats. Strangers were blessed at McDonald's, and Christmas parties for the homeless and the hungry, and St. Jude's and Easter seals. And if you saw the one story, there were like 135 bumpy cakes given out. You're like, where was I on Bumpy Cake Day? Blessings. The Whiskey and Pig Festival, that's not our tradition. And yet the love of God was made known there in the South Oakland shelter, and granola bars and green housing and Capuchin soup kitchen and help for an injured coworker and school supplies for kids in the Philippines and yarn wigs made with kids. This is the purpose of religion.
So if that's what can happen with $50, I want to imagine what could happen with 100. What could happen with 1,000? Maybe. If I had $1 million.
If I had $1 million,
Well, I'd buy you a house.
I would buy you a house.
And if I had $1 million,
And if I had $1 million,
I'd buy you furniture for your house.
maybe a nice chest a nice electric automobile.
And if I had $1 million,
I'd buy your love. And if I had $1 million, I'd build a tree fort in our yard. And if I had $1 million, you could help it, wouldn't be that hard.
and
If I had $1 million, maybe we could put a little tiny fridge in there somewhere.
you know, we could just go up there and hang out. Like open the fridge and stuff, and there'd be foods laid out for us with all little pre-wrapped sausages and things. I mean, they have pre-wrapped sausages, but they don't have pre-wrapped bacon.
Can you blame them?
Yeah. And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd send a kid to school.
I'd build a big old school in Haiti.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million
I'd start a 501c3.
to help our friends who don't have homes.
And if I had $1 million,
If I had $1 million,
I'd buy you all dessert.
we'd all eat bumpy cakes and ice cream.
And if I had $1 million,
I'd buy your love. And if I had $1 million, I'd build a dog park in our yard.
and
If I had $1 million, you could help it, wouldn't be that hard.
and
If I had $1 million, I'd be